daughter here sounded like a woman patting a child on the head. I've told them to remain here until we return. We will attract less attention, especially across the river, without anyone recognizably Aes Sedai. Especially across the river, without anyone recognizably Aes Sedai. Her notion of what to wear visiting the roughest part of the city without attracting attention was a wide green hat with green-dyed plumes, a light dust cloak of green linen worked in golden scrolls hanging down her back, and a high-necked green silk riding dress with gold embroidery climbing the divided skirts and thickly emphasizing the oval that exposed half her bosom. She even wore one of those necklaces for a marriage night. That broad band of woven gold would make every thief's hand in the Rahad itch. She carried no weapon beyond a small belt knife. But as to that, what weapon did a woman who could channel need? Of course, every one of those red belts had a curved dagger tucked beneath it. So did Rihanna's belt of plain-worked leather. Rihanna removed a large blue straw hat, frowned at it, then put it back on and retied the ribbons. Elaine's tone did not seem to be what was bothering her. She put on a diffident smile with the hat and a timid tone. But why does Merilila Sedai think we are lying, Elaine Sedai? They all do, one of the red belts said breathlessly. All of them wore Ebudari dresses in sober colors with narrow plunging necklines and skirts sewn up on one side to expose layered petticoats, but only this one, bone lean and with more white than black in her long hair, had the olive skin and dark eyes of an Ebudari. Saritha Sedai called me liar to my face about our numbers, about... She cut off short at a frown and a "be quiet, Tamarla" from Rihanna. Mistress Corey might be ready to curtsy and simper for a child if the child was Aes Sedai, but she kept a tight rein on her companions. Matt frowned up at the windows overlooking the stable yard, those he could see from where he stood. Elaborate white wrought iron screens covered some, white wooden screens of intricately carved piercework others. Not likely Tyler was up there. Not likely she would appear in the stable yard. He had been very careful not to wake her getting dressed. Besides, she would not try anything here. At least, he did not think she would. Then again, was anything past the woman who had had a half a dozen serving women seize him in the halls last night and drag him into her apartments? The bloody woman treated him like a toy. He was not going to put up with it anymore. He was not. Light, who was he trying to fool? If they did not grab this bull of the winds and get out of Ebudar, Tylen would be pinching his bottom and calling him her little pigeon again tonight. It's your ages, Rihanna. Elaine did not exactly sound hesitant. She never did that. But her tone became very careful. It is considered rude among Aes Sedai to speak of age, but... Rihanna, apparently no Aes Sedai since the breaking has lived as long as any of you in the knitting circle claim. That was the odd name these kin gave their ruling council. In your own case, not by over 100 years. The red belts gasped, going wide-eyed. A slender, brown-eyed woman with pale honey hair gave a nervous giggle and instantly covered her mouth at Rihanna's whip-quick, "Famela." That can't be possible, Rihanna said faintly to Elaine. Surely Aes Sedai must... Good morning, Matt said, stepping past the stream of plants. The whole discussion was idiotic. Everyone knew Aes Sedai lived longer than anybody else. Instead of wasting time, they should be on their way to the Rahad. Where are Tom and Julian? And Nynaeve? She had to have come back last night, or Elaine would have been in the Swivet. Blood and ashes, I don't see Brigitte either. We need to be on our way, Elaine, not standing around. Is Avienda coming? She frowned at him slightly, with just a flicker of her eyes toward Rihanna, and he knew she was deciding what performance to give him. Wide-eyed innocence might damage her standing with these women as much as flashing her dimple at him would. Elaine always expected that dimple to work where all else failed. Her chin rose slightly. Tom and Julian are helping Ariana and Rikita watch Carden's palace tonight. It was to be the daughter heir in near full bloom. Not the whole flowering, since she surely knew how he would react to that. But a voice full of certainty, cool blue eyes demanding, and that pretty face chill, if not exactly frozen with arrogance. Was there any woman in the world who was just one person? Nynaeve will be down shortly, I'm sure. There is no reason for you to come without that. Elysian and your soldiers are a more than adequate bodyguard. You could enjoy yourself right here in the palace until we return. Caridin, he cried. Elaine, we aren't staying in Ebudar to settle Jake and Caridin. We are getting the boom. Then you and Nynaeve is going to make a gateway, and we are leaving. Is that clear? And I am going to the Brahad. Enjoy himself. The light only knew what Tyden would get up to if he remained in the palace all day. The very thought made him want to laugh hysterically. Icy stares stabbed at him from the wise woman. Stout Sameko pursed her lips angrily, and Melora, a plump Damani in her middle years, whose bosom he had enjoyed eyeing yesterday, planted fists on hips with a face like a thunderhead. They should have known from yesterday that he was not intimidated by Aes Sedai, yet even Rihanna gave him such a scowl he half thought she might try to box his ears. Apparently, if they were going to fall all over themselves around Aes Sedai, then everybody else had to as well. Elaine struggled with herself visibly, her lips compressed, but one thing he had to give her. She was too smart to go on with what obviously would not work. On the other hand, she was snooty to the bone, however she tried. And the other women were watching. Matt, you know we cannot leave until we have used the bone. That haughty chin remained high, and her tone was at best halfway between explaining and telling. It might require days for us to be sure of how to use it. Perhaps even half a week or more. And we might as well finish Carton if we can in that time. Such a crackle at her voice and the White Cloak's name that you might have thought she bore the man a personal grudge. But something else leaped out and clamped a fist on his thoughts. Half a week! Feeling strangled, he put a finger behind the scarf knotted around his neck and tugged to ease it. Padlin had used that length of black silk to tie his hands last night before he knew what she was doing. Half a week? Or more? Despite his best efforts, his voice became a touch frantic. Elaine, surely you can use the bowl anywhere. It doesn't have to be here. Egwene must want you back as soon as possible. She can use a friend or two, I'll wager. By the last he had seen, she could use a few hundred. Maybe once he got these women back, Egwene would be ready to give up that nonsense about being Amelin, and let him take her to Rand along with Elaine and Nynaeve and Aviendha. And what about Rand, Elaine? Caemlyn? The Lion Throne? Blood and ashes, you know you want to reach Caemlyn quick as you can, so Rand can give you the Lion Throne. For some reason, her face grew darker almost by the word, and her eyes flashed. He would have said she was indignant, except, of course, that she had no cause. She opened her mouth angrily to argue as soon as he finished, and he set himself, ready to list her promises into the pit of doom, with what that did to her in the eyes of Rihanna and the rest. In most cases, they would have snubbed him short. Before anyone could say anything, though, a round, graying woman in Housemeat Savar livery was curtsying, first to Elaine, then to the women wearing red belts, and finally to him. Queen Tylen sends this Master Coffin, Laren said, holding out a basket with a striped cloth over the contents and small red flowers woven around the handle. You did not breakfast, and you must maintain your strength. Matt's cheeks warmed. The woman merely looked at him, but she had seen considerably more of him than when she first showed him into Tylen's presence. Considerably more. She had brought supper on a tray last night, but he tried to hide under the silk bedsheet. He did not understand it. These women had him jumping about and blushing like a girl. He just could not understand. Are you sure you wouldn't rather remain here? Elaine asked. I'm sure Tylen would enjoy your company for breakfast. The Queen said she finds you wonderfully entertaining and courteously compliant, she added in a doubtful tone. Matt fled for the coaches with the basket in one hand and his Ashendara in the other. Are all northern men so shy? Laren said. He risked a glance over his shoulder without stopping, and heaved a sigh of relief. The serving woman was already gathering her skirts, turning to walk through the screen of plants, and Elaine was motioning Rihanna and the wise women into a circle close around her. Even so, he shivered. Women were going to be the death of him yet. Rounding the nearest coach, he nearly dropped the basket at the side of Veslin, seated on the coach step, sunlight gleaming along the narrow blade of his sword as he examined the edge. "What are you doing here?" Matt exclaimed. Veslin slid the sword into its sheath, a grin splitting his face. "Coming with you to the Rahan. I suspect you'll find more fun for us." "There had better be some fun," Elysian yawned into his hand. "I didn't get very much sleep last night, and now you drag me off when there are seafolk women about." Bannon sat up on his barrel, looked around, found nothing moving, and settled himself back again with his eyes shut. "There'll be no fun if I can help it," Matt muttered. Elysian had not gotten much sleep. Ha! The whole lot of them had been out enjoying themselves at the festival. Not that he had not enjoyed himself in patches. Only when he could forget he was with a woman who thought he was some sort of bloody dog. What seafolk women? When Nynaeve said I returned last night, she brought a dozen of them there. Veslin blew out his breath, his hands made sweaty motions. Matt shook his head. He was not thinking of it. Conrad scrambled his brains. Nynaeve and Elaine had told him about the Wingfinders, and evidently, in sworn secrecy, trying to go back to him when I wanted to go, that's why. And not a single blush at the effort either. Women keep promises in their own way, so the saying went. Come to think of it, Lawton and Belvin were not with the rest of the Red Arms. Maybe Nynaeve thought to make up for the other by keeping them with her now. In their own way. But if she had the Windfinders already in the palace, surely it would not take half a week to do it. The tall man in a dark green coat on her arm was Lamb. Or rather, she was on his, clinging to it with both hands, smiling up at him. With any other woman, Matt would have said she was moon-eyed and pleased. This was Nynaeve. She gave a start, she was, and took a hasty step to one side, though she still held on to Lamb's hand for a moment. Her choice of dresses was no better than Elaine's. All blue silk and green embroidery, cut low enough to show a heavy gold ring that would have rattled on her two thumbs together, dangling on a thin gold chain. The wide hat she carried by its ribbons was draped with blue blooms. Her dust embroidered in blue. She and Elaine made the other women drab by comparison. Whether or not she had been calf-eyes a moment before, she was all herself now, shifting her braid around. "Join the other men now, Lan," she said peremptorily, "and we can go. The last 4 coaches are for the men." "As you say," Lan replied, bowing with a hand on his sword hilt. She watched him stride toward Matt with an expression of wonder, probably unable to believe he was obeying so weakly, then gave herself a shake and recovered her bristly self again. Gathering up Elaine and the other women, she herded them toward the first 2 coaches like a woman shooing geese. By the way she shouted for someone to open the stable yard gates, no one would have known she had been the one delaying their departure. She shouted at the drivers, too, setting them to snatching up their reins and flourishing their long whips. It was a marvel they waited for anyone to climb aboard. Scrambling awkwardly after Lan and Elysian and Veslin into the 3rd coach, Matt propped his spear across the door and sat down hard with the basket on his lap as the coach lurched forward. "Where did you come from, Lan?" he burst out as soon as introductions were out of the way. "You're the last man I expected to see. Where have you been? I had thought you were dead. I know Rand's afraid of you, and letting Nynaeve order you around. Why in the light would you do that?" The stone-faced warder seemed to consider which question to answer. "Nynaeve and I were married last night," he said finally. "Up on the air have several unusual marriage customs. There were some slightly. Seemingly, that was all the answer he intended to give. "The blessing of the light be upon you and your bride," Veslin murmured politely, with as much of a bow as the confines of the coach would allow. And Elysian mumbled something, though it was plain from his expression that he thought Lamb must be mad. Elysian had had a good bit of Nynaeve's company. Matt just sat there, swaying with the coach's motion and staring. Nynaeve? Married? Lamb? Married to Nynaeve? The man was mad. No wonder his eyes looked so bleak. Matt would as soon have stuffed a rabid fox down his own shirt. Only a fool married, and only a madman would marry Nynaeve. If Lan noticed that not everyone was overjoyed, he gave no sign. Except for his eyes, he looked maybe a little harder, if that was possible. "There is something more important," Lan said. "Nynaeve doesn't want you to know, Matt, but you need to. Your 2 men are dead, killed by Moghedien. I'm sorry, but if it is any consolation, they truly were dead before they knew. Nynaeve thinks Moghedien must be gone, or she'd have tried again, but I am not so certain. It seems she has a personal enmity toward Nynaeve, although Nynaeve managed to avoid telling me why." Again the smile. It seemed unaware of it. Not all of it, at least. And it does not matter. Best you know what might be facing us beyond the river, though. "Moghedien," Veslin breathed, eyes shining. The man was probably seeing fun. "Moghedien," Elysian breathed, but in his case, it was more of a groan, and he gave his pointed beard a fitful jerk. "Those bloody flaming women," Matt muttered. "I hope you don't include my wife," Matt said coldly, one hand gripping the hilt of his sword, and Matt quickly raised his own hands. "Of course not. Just Elaine and the kin." After a moment, Lan nodded, and Matt breathed a small sigh of relief. It would be just like Nynaeve to get him killed by her husband. Her husband! When sure as bread was brown, she would have hidden the fact that one of the Forsaken might be in the city. Even Moghedien did not really frighten him, not so long as he had the fox head around his neck. But the medallion could not protect Elysian or any of the rest. No doubt Nynaeve thought she and Elaine would do that. They let him bring along the Red Arms, all the while laughing up their sleeves at him while they... "Aren't you going to read my mother's note, Matt?" Until Veslin mentioned it, he had not realized there was a sheet of paper, folded small, tucked in between the basket and the striped cloth. Just enough showed to reveal the green seal, impressed with the anchor and sword. He broke the wax with his thumb and unfolded the page, holding it so Veslin could not see what was written. As well he did. Or then again, considering how the other man saw things, maybe it did not matter. Either way, Matt was just as glad no eyes but his saw those words. His heart sank deeper by the line. "Matt, my sweet, I'm having your things moved to my apartments. So much more convenient. By the time you return, Rosella will be in your old rooms to look after young Oliver. He seems like her company. I have seamstresses coming to measure you. I will enjoy watching that. You must wear shorter coats. And no breeches, of course. You have a delightful bottom. Duckling, who is this daughter of the 9 moons I made you think of? I have thought of several delicious ways to make you tell me." Ah. The others were all looking at him expectantly. Well, Lan was simply looking, but his gaze was more unnerving than the rest. That stare seemed almost dead. "The Queen thinks I need new clothes," Matt said, stuffing the note into his coat pocket. "I think I'll take a nap." He pulled the brim of his hat down over his eyes, but he did not close them, staring out the window, where the tied-back curtain let in occasional eddies of dust. It also let in the wind, though, which was considerably better than the heat of a closed coach. Moghedien and Tynan. Of the two, he would rather confront Moghedien. He touched the fox head hanging in the open neck of his shirt. At least he had some protection against Magedion. Against Tylan, he had no more than he did against the daughter of the Bloody Nine Moons, whoever she was. Unless he could find some way to make Nynaeve and Elaine leave Abu Dar before tonight, everybody was going to know. Sullenly, he tugged his hat lower. These flaming women really were making him act like a girl. In another minute, he was afraid he might just start crying. Chapter 38. 6 Stories. Matt would have gotten out and pulled the coach himself if he could. He thought they might have moved faster. The streets were already full, with the sun not all the way up. Wagons and carts wending their way noisily through the crowds and wind-blown dust, to shouts and curses both from drivers
Give 1
and
second,
forced out of the
everyone.
way. So many barges slid along the canals and the bargemen's poles that a man almost could have walked the canals like streets, stepping from one barge to the next. A noisy hum hung over the gleaming white city. Abu Dar seemed to be trying to make up for time lost yesterday, not to mention at High Chasleen, and the Feast of Lights, and well it might, considering that tomorrow night was the Feast of Embers, with Madden's Day, celebrating the founder of Altara, 2 days after that, and the Feast of the Half Moon the following night. Southerners had a reputation for industry, but he thought it was because they had to work so hard to make up for all the festivals and feast days. The wonder was that they had the strength for it. Eventually, the coaches did reach the river, drawing up at one of the long stone landings that jutted out into the water, all lined with steps for boarding the boats tied alongside. Sticking a wedge of dark yellow cheese and a butt end of bread into his pocket, he stuffed the basket well under the seat. He was hungry, but someone in the kitchens had been in too much of a hurry. Most of the basket was filled with a clay pot full of oysters, but the kitchens had forgotten to cook them. Scrambling down behind Lan, he left Melesian and Veslin to help Vannon and the others down from the last coaches. Nearly a dozen men, and not even the Carianan really small, they had been jammed in like apples in a barrel and clambered out stiffly. Matt strode ahead of the warder toward the lead coach, the Ashendari slanted across his shoulder. Nynaeve and Elaine were both going to get a piece of his mind, no matter who was listening. Hidden. Not to mention 2 of his men dead. He was going to... Suddenly very conscious of Lan towering behind him like a stone statue with that sword on his head, he amended his thoughts. The daughter heir, at least, was going to hear about keeping that sort of secret. Nynaeve was standing on the landing, tying on her blue-plumed hat and talking back up into the coach when he reached it. We'll work out, of course, but who would think the sea folk, of all people, would demand such a thing? Even just in private. But Nynaeve, Elaine said as she stepped down with her green-plumed hat in her hand, if last night was as glorious as you say, how can you complain about it? That was when they became aware of him and Lan. Of Lan, really. Nynaeve's eyes opened wider and wider, filling her face as it reddened to shame 2 sunsets. Elaine froze with 1 foot still on the coach step, giving the warder such a frown you would have thought he had sneaked up on them. Lan gazed down at Nynaeve, though, with no more expression than a fence post. For all Nynaeve appeared ready to crawl under the coach's hide, she stared up at him as if no one else existed in the world. Realizing her frown was wasted there, Elaine took her foot off the step and moved out of the way of Brianna, the 2 wise women for a sheriff coach, Marla, and the grand Saldei woman named Janira. But the daughter there was not behind. Oh no, she transferred that scowl to Matt Coffin. And if it altered a whit, it was to deepen. He snorted and shook his head. Usually when a woman was in the wrong, he found so many things to blame on the nearest man that he wound up thinking that he really was at fault. In his experience, old memories warned him, sometimes a woman admitted she was wrong, when she wanted something, and when it snowed at midsummer. Nynaeve seized at her braid, but not as if her heart was in it. Her fingers fumbled and fell away, and she started wringing her hands instead. Lan, she began unsteadily, you mustn't think I would talk about... The warder cut in smoothly, bowing and offering her his arm. We are in public, Nynaeve. Whatever you say in public. May I escort you? Yes, she said, nodding so vigorously that her hat nearly fell off. She straightened it hurriedly with both hands. Yes, in public. You will escort me. Taking his arm, she regained some measure of composure, at least insofar as her face went. Gathering her dust cloak in her free hand, she practically dragged him across the quay toward the landing. Matt wondered whether she might be ill. He enjoyed seeing Nynaeve drop to peg herself, whatever let it last 2 breaths. Aes Sedai could not heal themselves. Maybe he should suggest to Elaine that she deal with whatever was wrong with Nynaeve. He avoided healing like death or marriage himself, but he saw it. He had choice words to say about secrets. Opening his mouth, he raised an admonitory finger, and Elaine poked him in the chest with hers. Her scowl beneath that plumed hat so cold it made his toes hurt. Mistress Corley, she said in the icy voice of a queen pronouncing judgment, explain to Nynaeve and me the significance of those red flowers on the basket, which I see at least to have shame enough to have hidden. His face went redder than Nynaeve's had thought of. A few paces away, Rihanna Corley and the other two were tying on hats and adjusting dresses the way women did every time they sat down or moved 3 steps. Yet, despite giving their attention to their clothes, they had enough left over for glances in his direction, and for once, they were neither disapproving nor startled. He had not known the bloody flowers meant anything. 10 sunsets would not have done for his face. So, Elaine's voice was low for his ears alone, but it dripped disgust and contempt. She gave her cloak a twitch to keep it from touching him. It's true. I could not believe it of you. Not even you. I'm sure Nynaeve couldn't. Any promise I made to you is abolished. I would not keep any promise to a man who could force his attentions on a woman, on any woman, but especially on a queen who has offered him me. Force my attentions on her, he shouted. Or rather, he tried to shout. Choking made it come out in a wheeze. Seizing Elaine's shoulders, he pulled her away from the carriages a little distance. Shirtless dockmen in stained green leather vests hurried by, carrying sacks on their shoulders or rolling barrels along the quay, some pushing low barrows loaded with crates, all giving the coaches a wide berth. The Queen of Altara might not have much power, but her sigil on a coach door ensured that commoners would give it room. Elysian and Veslin were chatting as they led the Red Arms onto the landing, Bannon bringing up the rear and staring gloomily at the choppy river. He claimed to have a tender belly when it came to boats. The wise women from both coaches had gathered around Rihanna, watching, but they were not close enough to overhear. He whispered hoarsely just the same. You listen to me. That woman won't take no for an answer. I say no and she laughs at me. She starved me, bullied me, chased me down like a stag. She has more hands than any 6 women I ever met. She threatened to have the serving women undress me if I didn't let her. Abruptly what he was saying hit him, and who he was saying it to. He managed to close his mouth before he swallowed a fly. He became very interested in one of the dark metal ravens inlaid in the haft of the Ashandarai, so he would not have to meet her eyes. What I mean to say is, you don't understand, he muttered. You have it all backwards. He risked a glance at her under the edge of his hat brim. A faint blush crept into her cheeks, but her face became solemn as a marble bust. It appears that I may have misunderstood, she said soberly. That is very bad of Tylen. He thought her lips twitched. Have you considered practicing different smiles in a mirror, Matt? Startled, he blinked. What? I have heard reliably that is what young women do who attract the eyes of kings. Something cracked the sobriety of her voice, and this time her lips definitely twitched. You might try patting your eyelashes, too. Catching her lower lip under her teeth, she turned away, shoulders shaking, dust cloak streaming behind her as she hurried toward the landing. Before she darted beyond hearing, he heard her chortle something about a taste of his own medicine. Rihanna and the wise women scurried in her wake, a flock of hens following a chick, instead of the other way around. The few bare-chested boatmen up on their boats stopped coiling lines, or whatever they were doing, and bowed their heads respectfully as the procession went by. Snatching off his hat, Matt considered throwing it down and jumping on it. Women! He should have known better than to expect sympathy. He would like to throttle the bloody daughter heir. And Nynaeve, too, on general principle. Except, of course, that he could not. He had made promises, and those dykes were still using his skull for a dice cup, and one of the Forsaken might be around somewhere. Settling the hat squarely back on his head, he marched down the landing, brushed past the wise woman, and caught up to Elaine. She was still trying to fight down giggles, but every time she cut her eyes his way, the color in her cheeks renewed itself, and so did the giggles. He stared straight ahead. Bloody women. Bloody promises. Removing his hat long enough to pull the leather cord from around his neck, he reluctantly shoved it in her direction. The silver fox head dangled beneath his fist. You and Nynaeve will have to decide which of you wears this. But I want it back when we leave Abu Dar. You understand? The moment we leave... Suddenly he realized he was walking alone. Turning, he found Elaine standing stock still 2 paces back, staring at him with Rihanna and the rest clustered behind her. What's the matter now? He demanded. Oh, yes, I know all about Moghedien. A skinny fellow with red stones on his brass hoop earrings, bending over a mooring line, jerked around so fast at that name that he pitched over the side with a loud yell and a louder splash. Matt did not care who heard. Trying to keep her secret, and 2 of my men dead after you promised. Well, we'll talk about that later. I made a promise too. I promised to keep the pair of you alive. Moghedien shows up, she'll go after you 2. Now here. At her again. She shook her head slowly in puzzlement, then turned to murmur to Rihanna. Only after the older women were on their way toward where Nynaeve stood beckoning them, at the head of a flight of boat stairs, did Elaine take the fox head, turning it over in her fingers. Do you have any notion what I would have done to have this? She said quietly. Any notion at all? She was tall for a woman, but she still had to look up at him. She might never have seen it before. You are a troublesome man, Nat Horton. Lenny would say I was repeating myself, but you... Expelling her breath, Elaine reached up to pull his hat off and slipped the cord over his head. She actually tucked the fox head into his shirt and patted it before handing him his hat. I won't wear that while Nynaeve still doesn't have one, or Avienda. And I think they feel the same. You wear it. After all, you can hardly keep your promise if Moghedien kills you. Not that I think she's still here. I think she believes she killed Nynaeve, and I would not be surprised if that was all she came for. You must be careful. Nynaeve says there's a storm coming, and she doesn't mean this wind. That faint blush returned to her cheeks. I am sorry I laughed at you. She cleared her throat, looking away. Sometimes I forget my duty to my subjects. You are a worthy subject, Matron Coffin. I will see that Nynaeve understands the right of you and Tyler. Perhaps we can help. No, he spluttered. I mean, yes. I mean, that is... Oh, kiss a flaming goat if I know what I mean. I almost wish you didn't know the truth. Nynaeve and Elaine sitting down to discussing with Tylen over tea. Would he ever live that down? Would he ever again look any of them in the eye afterward? But if they did not, he was between the wolf and the bear with nowhere to run. Oh, sheep swallop. Sheep swallop and bloody buttered onions. He nearly wished she would call him down for his language the way Nynaeve would, just to change the subject. Her lips moved silently, and for an instant he had the strange impression that she was repeating what he had just said. Of course not. He was seeing things, that was all. Aloud, she said, I understand, sounding just as if she did. Come along now, Matt. We can't waste time standing in one spot. Gaping, he watched her lift skirts and cloak to make her way along the landing. She understood. She understood, and not one acid little comment, not one cutting remark. And he was her subject, her worthy subject. Fingering the medallion, he followed. He had been sure the fight would be to ever get it back. If he lived as long as two Aes Sedai, he still would never understand women, and noble women were purely the worst. When he reached the steps Elaine had gone down, the boat's two brass-earringed oarsmen were already using their long sweeps to push the vessel away. Elaine was herding Rihanna and the last of the wise women into the cabin, and Lan stood up in the bows with Nynaeve. A shout from Veslin called him onto the next boat, which held all of the men except the warder. Nynaeve said there wasn't any room for any of us, Elysian said as the boat rocked its way out into the Elder. She said we'd crowd them. Veslin laughed, looking around their own boat. Vannon sat beside the cabin door with his eyes closed, trying to pretend he was somewhere else. Arnon and Tad Candle, and Endoran, despite being as dark as either of the boatmen, had climbed atop the cabin. The rest of the Red Arms hunkered about the deck, trying to keep out of the way of the rowers. Nobody went into the cabin, while apparently waiting to see whether Matt and Elysian and Veslin wanted it. Matt put himself beside the tall bow post, peering after the other boat, crawling on its sweeps just ahead. The wind whipped the dark, choppy waters, and his scarf as well, and he had to hold on to his hat. What was Nynaeve up to? The other 9 women on the second boat were all in the cabin, leaving the deck to her and Lan.
Hey,
Bows,
SD Sports Talk Channel, how you doing?
Except that Nynaeve
Nice.
seldom explained anything. Better say never, but seldom. Whatever she was doing...
What games do you play?
There were whitecaps out in the bay, where seafolk rakers and skimmers and soarers heaved at their anchors. The river was not so bad, but the boat still wallowed more than Matt remembered from any previous trips. Before long, Nynaeve was draped over the railing, losing her breakfast while Lan held her. That reminded Matt of his own belly. Tucking his hat under his arm so it could not blow away, he pulled out the wedge of cheese. Veslin, is this storm likely to break before we come back from the Rahad? He took a bite of the sharp-tasting cheese. They had 50 different sorts in Everdar, all good. Nynaeve was still hanging over the side. How much had the woman eaten this morning?
No shit,
I don't know
hell
where
yeah.
we'll shelter if we're caught. He could not think of a single inn he had seen in the Rahad that he would take the women into. No storm, Veslin said, seating himself on the railing. These are the winter trade winds. The trades come twice a year, in late winter and late summer. But they have to blow much harder before it comes to storm. He directed a sour look out toward the bay.
Nice.
Every year those winds brought ships from Tarabon and Dara Daman. I wonder whether they ever will again. The wheel leaves, Matt began, and choked on a crumb of cheese. Blood and ashes, he was starting to sound like some gray hair rusting his aching joints in front of the fireplace. Worrying about taking the women into a rough inn.
Nice.
A year ago, half a year, he would have taken them and laughed when their eyes popped, laughed at every prim sniff. Well, maybe we'll find you some fun in the Rahad anyway. At the least,
Audiobooks
somebody
are
will try to
definitely
cut it first, pull Elaine's necklace
relaxing.
off. Maybe that was what he needed to
There's
keep his
sometimes
face
that
this time.
when I have my
Life.
PS5 in my
Or word to
room,
apply to Matt Coffey.
I don't have it in my room right now.
Must be scaring them more than he thought.
I'll be playing around
Maybe he
this
needed some of
time,
Veslin's sort of fun.
and usually have an audiobook playing while
He'd
I'm
never seen the fight
playing
without
whatever
that
game I'm
walk
playing,
But maybe
which usually Diablo or
if anyone can find it, you can. But
UFC or something
we'll be
like
with
that.
7 wise women, Matt. 7. With just one at your side, you could slap a man, even in the Rahad, and he would swallow his tongue and walk away. And the women. What's the fun of kissing a woman without the risk she'll decide to stick a knife in you?
I have
Lacey muttered into his
most
ear.
of
Sounds as though I
Assassin's
dragged myself
Creed's,
from bed for a dull
UFC,
Veslin nodded in
pretty much all the
commiseration.
UFCs,
If we're lucky,
Skyrim,
the Civil Guard does
Diablo
send patrols
2, Diablo
occasionally,
3,
and
Diablo
after
4,
smugglers, they dress like anyone else. They seem to think nobody will notice a
Gotham
dozen or so men
Knights.
together carrying swords, whatever they wear. And they're always surprised when the smugglers ambush them, which is what nearly always happens. If Matt's Tavir and luck works for us, we might be taken for the Civil Guard, and some smugglers might attack
No,
us
not
before
too
they
many
see the
sports
belts.
games.
Elysian brightened and began rubbing his hands together.
Mainly because I'm not very good at sports games or
For one thing, he had more than enough of
or
women
racing games.
Nynaeve still hung over the side of the boat ahead. Then would teach her to gorge herself, rolling down the last of the G's.
So I tend not to play him so much.
An easy trip with no trouble did not sound bad at all. A quick trip with a quick departure from Abu Dar. The Rahad was everything he remembered, and everything Veslin feared. The wind made climbing the cracked gray stone steps of the boat landing into a perilous feat, and after that it grew worse. Canals ran
I'm not sure you call it multiplayer. You could play like one-on-one versus matches on UFC.
Half the canals were so silted that boys waded waist deep in them, and hardly a barge was to be seen. Tall buildings stood crowded together, blocky structures with scabrous once white plaster gone in huge patches to reveal rotting red brick, bordering narrow streets with broken paving stones. In those
23.
streets were even the fragments.
What do you mean 23? I don't think I've heard of that one.
Reach into the shadows of the buildings. Dingy
There's
laundry
UFC
rooms
5
that
just came out.
except where a structure stood empty. Some did. Those windows gaped like eye sockets in a skull. A sour, sweet smell of decay permeated the air. Last month's chamber pots and ancient refuse smoldering wherever it had been flung. And for every fly on the other side of the Eldar, 100 buzzed here in clouds of green and blue. He spotted the peeling blue door of the golden crown of heaven and shuddered at the thought of taking the women in there if the storm broke, despite what Veslin said. Then he shuddered again for having shuddered. Something was happening to him, and he did not like it. Nynaeve and Elaine insisted on taking the lead, with Rihanna between them and the wise woman close behind. Lan stayed at Nynaeve's shoulder like a wolfhound, hand on sword hilt, eyes constantly searching, radiating menace. In truth, he was probably enough protection for 24 pretty 16-year-olds carrying sacks of gold, even here. But Matt insisted that Bannon and the rest keep their eyes open. In fact, the former horse thief and poacher kept so close to Elaine that anyone could have been forgiven for thinking he was her warder, if a rather fat and rumpled one. Veslin
can.
Expressively at Matt's instructions, and Elysian
You can play one-on-one matches in pretty much all the UFCs. As long as they hadn't closed the servers on them yet.
Great brass hoops in their ears and brass finger rings set with colored glass. One knife or sometimes two stuck behind their belts. Hands hovering near those knives, they stared as though daring someone to give the wrong twist to a look. Others skulked from corner to corner.
But if you're asking if we can, probably when I'm online again, I probably can.
For a man to squeeze into. Those men hunched over their knives, and there was no way to tell which would run and which stab. By and large, the women made any of the men appear humble, raiding in worn dresses, and twice as much brass jewelry as the men. They carried knives too, of course, and their bold, dark eyes sent 10 sorts of challenge in every glance. In short, the Rahad was the sort of place where anyone wearing silk could hardly hope to walk 10 steps without being cracked over the head. After which, they had best hope to wake stripped to the skin and tossed onto a pile of rubbish in an alley.
I don't know.
Since the alternative was not to wake at
I
all.
don't know if I have a favorite one.
But
Well, I guess I do. It'd be from Pride. It'd be Fedor and Emelianenko.
Stared open-mouthed at 7 wise women together, then bobbed jerky bows and inquired politely if they could be of assistance. Was there anything that required carrying? Women, sometimes with as many scars, and always eyes to make Thailand flinch, curtsied awkwardly and breathlessly asked whether they might supply directions. Did anyone make a bother of themselves to bring so many wise women? If so, the strong implication was, Tamala and the rest had no need of troubling themselves if they would just supply the name. Oh, they glared at the soldiers as hotly as ever, though even the hardest flinched away from Lan after a single look, and oddly enough from Bannon. A few of the men growled at Veslin and Elysian whenever they gazed too long at a woman's deep neckline. Some growled at Matt, though we could not understand why. Unlike those two, he was never in danger of his eyeballs falling down the front of a woman's dress. He knew how to look discreetly. Nynaeve and Elaine were ignored for all their finery, and so was Rihanna in her red wool dress. They did not have the red belt, but they did have the protection of those belts. Matt realized that Veslin had been right. He could empty his purse on the ground, and no one would pick up a copper, at least so long as the wise woman remained. He could pinch the bottom of every woman in sight, and even if she had apoplexy, she would walk away. "What a pleasant walk," Elysian said dryly, "with such interesting sights and smells. Did I tell you I didn't get much sleep last night, Matt?"
Yep, he's from Russia.
"Do you want to die in bed?" Matt grumbled. They might as well all have stayed in bed. They were bloody useless here, that was for sure. The tyrant snorted indignantly.
He may be from Russia, but he's still a good fighter.
Something else. Across the Rahad they marched until Rihanna finally stopped in front of a building exactly like every other, all flaking plaster and crumbling brick. The same Matt had followed another woman to yesterday. No laundry hung from these windows. Only rats lived in there. "In here," she said. Elaine's eyes climbed slowly to the flat roof. "6," she murmured in tones of great satisfaction.
He can't do matches like that.
And Elaine patted her arm as though sympathizing with her. "I wasn't really sure," she said. So Nynaeve smiled and patted her. Matt did not understand a word of it. So the building had 6 floors.
I'll be right back.
Women behave very strangely sometimes. Well, most of the time. Inside, a long hallway carpeted with dust ran dimly to the back, the far end lost in shadows. Few of the doorways held doors, and those were rough planks. One opening, almost a third of the way down the hall, led to a narrow flight of steep stone-faced steps climbing upward. That was the way he had gone the day before, following footprints in the dust, but he thought some of those other openings must be crossing corridors. He had not taken time to look around then, but the building was too deep and too wide for this floor to be served by only the one they saw. It was too big for only one way in. "Really, Matt," Nynaeve said when he told off Harnan and half the Red Arms to find any way back in and guard it. Lan kept so close to her side he might have been glued there. "Don't you see by now there's no need?" Her tone was so mild that Elaine must have passed on the truth about Tylan. But if anything, that only soured his mood further. He did not want anyone to know.
Yeah, he do both of them until you just get random fighters. Just hit random.
"Maybe Moghedian likes back doors," he said dryly. Something chittered in the dark end of the hall, and one of the men with Harnan cursed loudly about rats. "You told him," Nynaeve breathed furiously at Lan, one hand snapping shut on her brain. Elaine made an exasperated sound. "This is no time to stop for an argument, Nynaeve. The bowl is upstairs. The bowl of the winds." A small ball of light suddenly appeared, floating in front of her, and without waiting to see whether or not Nynaeve was coming, she gathered her skirts and darted up the stairs. Bannon dashed after her with a startling turn of speed for his bulk, followed by Rihanna and most of the wise women. Round-faced Sumeko and Iaina, tall and dark and pretty despite the lines at the corners of her eyes, hesitated, then remained with Nynaeve. Matt would have gone too, if Nynaeve and Lan had not been in his way. "Would you let me by, Nynaeve?" he asked. He deserved to be there at least when this fabulous blood was uncovered.
I chose it because
She was so focused on
there for a while I used to actually
Matt exchanged glances
hop
with
freight
Veslin,
trains
who
and
had
travel.
fought easily with Korriban and the remaining Red Arms. Elysian leaned against the
And then
wall,
the scum
long
thing's just a
box of
punk
dishes,
rocker thing.
which was a mistake with all that dust about.
So I just
He
combined
almost
the
turned into
two.
a coughing fit that darkened his face and doubled him over. Even that did not distract Nynaeve. Carefully, she took her hand away from her braid. "I am not angry, Lan," she said. "Yes, you are," he replied calmly, but he had to be told. "Nynaeve," Matt said. "Lan?" Neither one of them so much as flickered an eye his way. "I would have told him when I was ready, Landman Pregarin." Her mouth clamped shut, but her lips writhed as though she were talking to herself. "I will not be angry with you," she went on in a much milder tone, and that sounded addressed to herself as well. Very deliberately, she tossed her braid back over her shoulder, jerked that blue plume
I'd be glad when I go to the dentist tomorrow.
If you say so, Lad said mildly. Nynaeve quivered. Don't you take that tone with me, she shouted. I tell you I'm not angry. Do you hear me? Blood and ashes, Nynaeve, Matt growled. He isn't thinking angry. I don't think you're angry. A good thing women had taught him to lie with a straight face. Now can we go upstairs and fetch this bloody the winds? A marvelous idea, said a woman's voice from the door to the street. Shall we go up together and surprise Elaine? Matt had never seen the two women who walked into the hall before, but their faces were Aes Sedai faces. The speaker's was long and cold as her voice, her companions framed by scores of thin...
Yep, I smoke weed, wax.
Nearly 24 men...
But I have my medical card in my state.
Clubs and knives in hand. Matt shifted his grip on the Ashendara.
Plus, it's recreational.
The on his chest was cool, almost cold against his skin. Somebody was holding the one power. The two wise women nearly fell over, dropping curtsies as soon as they saw those ageless
Hey,
faces.
Diamond Fox, how you doing?
Certainly knew trouble too. Her mouth worked
I don't know.
as the pair came down the hallway. Her face all consternated.
I'm gonna do too bad. Diamond Fox.
He was not about to look back to see Land. Which meant, of course, everybody to pounce.
Drinking,
They're Black Archer, and you said it last.
very rarely I'll drink.
And gained strength.
Hey, Sam Squash, how you doing?
Thalian Boda and Ispan Shafar. They committed murder in the tower, and worse since. Their dark friends ended. Her voice faltered for an instant. They have shielded me. The newcomers continued to advance serenely. Have you ever heard
How you
such
doing,
Ispan? The long-faced Aes Sedai asked her companion,
Glad.
who stopped
Sam
pacing
Squash.
long enough to smirk at them.
Good to see you again.
Ispan and I come from the White Tower, while Nynaeve and her friends are rebels against the Amaran Seat. They'll be punished severely for that, and so will anyone who... Matt realized the woman did not know. She thought that he and Lan and the others were just hired strong-arms. Balian directed a smile at Nynaeve. It made a blizzard warm by comparison. There's someone who will be overjoyed to see you when we get you back, Nynaeve.
I'll
She
drink,
thinks you are
but
dead.
not very
Well, after
often.
you go now, you don't want to meddle in Aes Sedai affairs. My men will see you to the river. Without taking her eyes from Nynaeve, Balian motioned for the men behind her to come forward. Lan moved. He did not draw his sword, and against Aes Sedai, he should have had no chance if he had. No chance in any case. But one moment he was standing still, and the next he had thrown himself at the pair. Just before he struck, he
Yeah, I have a septum piercing.
but he crashed into them, carrying both Black Sisters to the dusty floor.
Have my ears gauged.
That opened the sluice gates wide. Lan pushed himself to hands and knees, shaking his head groggily, and one of the bulky fellows raised an iron-strapped club to smash his skull. Matt stabbed the fellow in the belly with his spear, as Beslan and Elysian and the 5 Red Arms rushed to meet the Dark Friend's shouting charge. Lan staggered to his feet, sword sweeping out to open a Dark Friend from crotch to neck. There was not much room to work sword or Ashendara in the corridor, but the tight quarters were what allowed them to face odds of 2 to 1 or worse.
I got it from
the first moment. Grunting men
I actually got it done at
elbowing each other for room to
a
stab
tattoo
was so
convention.
Small spaces remained clear around the Black Sisters and around Nynaeve. They saw to that themselves.
No, I'm not trying to get
A
my
wiry
fat
hand
belly
in red
pierced.
arm almost bumped into Thalian, but at the last instant, he jerked into the air and flew across the hallway, knocking down 2 of the heavy-shouldered Dark Friends in his flight, before smacking into the wall and sliding down, the back of his head leaving a bloody smear on the cracked, dusty plaster. A bald-headed Dark Friend squeezed through the line of defenders and rushed at Nynaeve with outstretched knife. He yelled as his feet were suddenly jerked back from him, a yell that cut off when his face hit the floor so hard that his head bounced. Obviously, Nynaeve was no longer shielded, and if the chilly silver fox head sliding around Matt's chest as he fought was not
Body
enough indication
piercing.
that she and the Black Sisters were in some sort of struggle,
Just what you see on my
the way they
face.
glared at her and she at them, ignoring the battle around them, shouted them back. The wise women looked on in horror. They had knives in their fists, but they huddled against the wall, staring from Nynaeve to the other two with eyes wide and mouths hanging open. Fight! Nynaeve snapped at them. She turned her head just a fraction, so she could see them as well as Phalion and Ispan. I cannot do it alone. They're linked. If you don't fight them, they will kill you. You know about them now. The wise woman gaped at her, as though she had suggested spitting in the queen's face. In the midst
Oh,
of
my
shouts
ears,
and
I
grunts,
did myself.
laughed melodiously. In the midst of shouts and grunts, a shrill scream echoed down the stairs.
Did him
Nynaeve's head
and
swung that way.
slowly
Suddenly she
stretched them
staggered,
both
and her
out.
head swung back like a wounded badger's, with a scowl that should have made Phalion and Ispan leave right then if they had any sense. Nynaeve spared an agonized glance from Matt, though. There was channeling upstairs, she said through her teeth. There's trouble. Matt hesitated. More likely Elaine had seen a rat.
Not so much. Just the
He managed to knock
occasional
aside a dagger thrust at his ribs.
cuss word
There was no
that
one to stab back with the Ashtar
that
axe,
slips
or use the half
out once in a while, but
Veslin stabbed
for the most
past
part,
him
no.
and took his attacker through the heart. Please, Matt, Nynaeve said tightly. She never begged. She would cut her own throat first. Please. With a curse, Matt pulled himself out of the fight and dashed up the steep, narrow stairs, taking all 6 flights in the dark stairwell at a dead run. There was not a single window to give light. If it was just a rat, he was going to shake Elaine till her teeth. He burst out onto the top floor.
Ooh,
Not much brighter
that
than
would
the stairwell,
suck.
with only one window at the street end. Burst into a scene from nightmare. Women lay sprawled everywhere. Elaine was one, half on her back against the wall, eyes closed. Bannon crouched on his knees, blood streaming from nose and ears.
that definitely sounded like it hurt, bro.
The last woman on her feet, Janira, fled toward Matt as soon as she saw him. He had thought of her as a hawk, with her hooked beak of a nose and sharp cheekbones, but her face was pure terror now, those dark eyes wide and stark. Help me! She screamed at him.
No, it's not sweets. Just
He was an ordinary
a lot of good
fellow,
Mexican
maybe
food.
a little older than Matt, of the same height and slender in a plain gray coat. Smiling, he took Janira's
Have a
hand
good
between his
one,
hands
Diamond
and
Fox.
twisted sharply. The sound of her neck breaking was like a dry branch snapping. He let her drop in a boneless heap and gazed down at her. For a moment, his smile looked rapturous. By the light of a pair of lanterns, a small
I remember how my
fire
septum was when I stretched it out.
sleeve of rusted hinges. Matt hardly noticed. His eyes were
Mexican
fixed
food,
on his corpse to a
My
lamp.
favorite had to be
Promised to keep her
tamales.
safe for Rand. He had promised.
But other than that,
With a cry, he
homemade
launched himself
tortillas,
at the killer,
some
ushered down
good
instead. Matt had seen
enchiladas.
more, but this fellow was quicker.
just depends what it is and what I'm in the mood
He
for
just
that
seemed to
day.
flow from in front of the spear, and seizing the hat, he pivoted, flinging Matt past him 5 paces down the hall.
What's a septum piercing? That's what
The floor in a small cloud of
that's
dust.
what this piercing right here is called. When it's in the
For air, he pushed himself
center of your
up, box head
nose,
dangling from his open shirt.
like that, it's
Dragging
called
the knife
a
under his
septum
throat, he flung
piercing.
himself at the man again, just as Nelisian appeared at the head of the stairs, sword in hand. Now they had him. However quick the man made a Murdrell seem stiff. He slid around Nelisian's thrust as though there was not a bone in his body, right hand shooting out to seize Nelisian's throat. His hand came away with a liquid ripping sound. Blood fountained past Nelisian's beard. His sword dropped, ringing on the dusty stone floor, and he clutched both hands to his ruined neck, red running through his fingers as he
And
fell.
I've had mine pierced
Matt
for
crashed into the killer's back, and they all 3 hit the floor together. He had no compunction
Over
about
10
stabbing a man in
years.
the back when it was necessary, especially a man who could tear somebody's throat out. He should have let Nelisian stay
just
in
do a
bed.
dab now.
The thought came sadly as he drove the blade home hard, then a second time, a third. The man twisted in his grip. It should not have been possible, but somehow the fellow rolled over beneath him, pulling the knife hilt out of his hand. Nelisian's staring
Yeah,
eyes
get
and
better-
bloody throat
better
were a
view
reminder
of
right
it.
before his eyes. Desperately, he grabbed the man's wrists, one hand slipping a little in the blood that ran down the fellow's hand. The man smiled at him. With a knife sticking out of his side, he smiled. He wants you dead as much as he wants her, he said softly. And as if Matt was not holding him at all, his hands moved toward Matt's head, driving Matt's arms back. Matt pushed frantically, He rolled his weight
Nice.
against the fellow's arms to no avail. Light, he might as well have been a child fighting a grown man. The fellow was making a game
Damn.
of it.
Yeah, that
taking
would
his
suck
baby time.
about being that area and not be able to get
That was his
good
flaming
food
luck.
or good Mexican
He
food
gave
or
it heave with what seemed his last strength. And the
or even
medallion broke
spicy
against the
food.
man's cheek. The man screamed. Smoke rose around the edges of the fox head, and a sizzle like bacon frying. Convulsively, he hurled Matt away with hands and feet both. This time, Matt flew 10 paces and slid. When he scrambled to his feet, half dazed, the man was
So
already
if I
up,
was able
hands
to
pointing at
move
his
to
face.
Canada and
A raw red brand
start a
marked
Mexican
with a
restaurant
fox
and make a killing.
Gingerly, Matt fingered the medallion. It was
Okay.
not the cool of someone channeling nearby.
Everyone has their own
Maybe there was
opinion on
chatter
that.
below, but that was too far off.
When a majority of
Just the
people
cool
that
of
have
silver.
them are male.
He had no notion what this fellow was, except that he certainly was not human. But between that and 3 stab wounds, with the knife hilt still jutting out beneath his arm, he had to be slow enough for Matt to get past him to the stairs. Avenging Elaine was all very well, and Elise knew too, but it was not going to happen today, apparently. And there was no cause to supply a reason for avenging that coffin. Jerking the knife out of his side, the man broke it. Matt snanked it out of the air without thinking. Tom had taught him to juggle. Tom said he had the quickest hands he'd ever seen. Flipping the knife around so he held it properly, the point
I'm not saying they don't have them. I'm just saying that
is hard to say.
it's not very common for women to get septum done.
But the skill showed bright and clear. Maybe even 3 stab wounds was not going to slow this, whatever he was.
I've seen plenty of women with them just because
The other men were streaming out of that door they had pried open.
working in a tattoo shop.
Led him to yesterday, but their arms seemed full of rubbish. Small, half-rotted chests, a cask with cloth-wrapped objects bulging through missing staves, even a broken chair and a cracked mirror. They must have had orders to take everything. Paying no attention whatever to Matt, they hurried toward the far end of the hall and vanished around a corner. There had to be another set of stairs back there. Maybe he could follow them at a distance. Maybe just before the doorway they had come out of, Bannon fell back.
That sounds about right.
Bit back a curse. Lugging Bannon was going to slow him, but if his luck was in, he had not saved Elaine, but maybe from the corner of his eye, lifting a hand to his face, the man in the gray coat saw it too. With a smile,
Especially it being a
scabbard. You can't have
dragon
it, he said loudly.
that's
Promises.
pretty much
One jerk
a
broke the
sleeve
left
on the
foot of his
arm.
neck. The silver fox had dangled a
The
foot
line
above
work
his
would
waist.
be that,
He made a low hum as he
and
whirled
what's-
in a double loop.
and that's actually
You
a
can't
pretty good
bloody have
deal
her.
because
He started forward, keeping the medallion.
a lot of places will charge more.
The first step was the hardest, but he had a promise to keep. The fellow's smile faded. Watching the flashing fox head warily, he backed away on his toes. The same light that glittered on the whirling silver.
Yeah, shoulder, elbow, it being a quarter sleeve like that,
If Matt could drive him that far,
600 just for the line work is pretty good just because,
Brand livid on
it's
his
a
face,
dragon,
backed away.
and all the
Sometimes Pat reached over
scales,
to try grabbing past the medallion.
and then the belly.
Suddenly, he darted
That's
to
a lot
one
of
side
line work.
into one of the rooms. This one had a door that he pulled shut behind him. Matt heard the
Now
door.
what you're going to worry about is
Maybe he should have left it there.
how much it's going to cost them
Slammed the heel of his boot against the center of
to
the
get
door.
it finished,
Dust leaped off the rough wood.
because that's
A second kick, and rotten
depending
ball
on
passed
how-
the gateway, along with the rusted hinge.
he wants it.
The door fell in.
If he wants it black and gray,
The room was not entirely
it won't
dark.
be that bad.
Light reached it from the window.
But if he wants it
Just one door away.
full color,
And a
and
broken
depending on the
triangle
color,
mirror leaning against the far wall
that tends to be
spread no
a
illumination.
little bit more pricey.
That mirror
just
let him see
'cause
everything without going in.
Color is more expensive.
Aside from that and a piece of a chair, there was nothing else to see. The only openings were the doorway and a rat hole beside the mirror. The man in the gray coat was gone. Matt, Elaine called faintly. He hurried away from the room as much as toward her. They were shouting somewhere below, but not even.
Hell yeah, Sasquatch.
Elaine was
And
working her jaw and wincing.
what kind of
covered her dress.
Indian are you talking about? Sports talk like Indian, like Native American Indian, or Indian from India?
He hit me so hard, she said painfully. I don't think anything is broken, but her eyes latched onto his. And if you had ever thought,
well, that's because back then,
stranger, you saw it for true now.
I think nowadays the colors stay in better just because tattoos come a long way since back in the day, to where they're actually able to put color to stick.
Glancing at the medallion still hanging from
Oh, okay. Sports talk. Yeah, I have seen that in for y'all's like heritage. That a lot more females have that than the males. I can see what you're talking about on that. I understand that part of it. Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't know you meant it in that way, but yeah.
I'll see what I can arrange, he said dryly, stuffing the medallion into a coat pocket. Told? Beat her? Light. The woman was definitely spending too much time with Avienda. Once he helped her to her feet, she looked at the hallway, at Bannon with his blood-smeared face.
And my bad for coming off the way I did. I didn't mean it like that.
Oh, light, she breathed. Oh, blood and bloody flaming ashes. Despite the situation,
Tanner got to work on
it was not just
how I say stuff or how I word stuff when I speak.
As if she knew the sound.
Because sometimes it comes off in
somehow
the wrong way. And I don't mean for it to happen.
Shaking off his arm, she discarded her hat, just tossing it aside, and hurried to kneel beside the nearest wise woman, Brianna, and take her head in both hands. The woman lay limp, face down, and
oh shit,
stretched out as though she
that's pretty cool.
Toward the room everyone had been after.
And they have like the sides and the septum done too. I think I've seen some of that when they dress up like that, to where the sides of the nostril are pierced, and they also have the septum.
No need to shriek like a cat, Annie growled, appearing in the stairwell. She was looking back over her shoulder down the stairs, though. You hold her tight, you hear me? She shrieked like a cat. She carried her hat and shook it at whoever she was shouting at. You let her get away too, and I'll box your ears till you hear bells next year. She turned then, and her eyes nearly bulged out of her head. The light shine on us, she breathed, hurrying to bend over Janira. One touch, and she straightened, wincing painfully. He could have told her the woman was dead. Nynaeve seemed to take death personally. Giving herself a shake, she went on to the next. To Marla, and this time it appeared there was something she could heal. It also appeared Tamara's injuries were not simple because she knelt over her, frowning. What happened here, Matt? She demanded without looking around at him. Her tone made him sigh. He might have known she would decide it was his fault. Well, Matt, what happened? Will you speak up, man, or do I have to? He never learned what threat she intended to offer. Lan had followed Nynaeve out of the stairwell, of course, with Sumeko right at his heels. The stout wise woman took one look at the hall and immediately lifted her skirts and ran to Rihanna. She did give Elaine one worried glance before lowering herself to her knees and beginning to move her hands over Rihanna in an odd way. That was what pulled Nynaeve up short. What are you doing? She said sharply. Not halting what she was doing to Tamarla, she spared the round-faced woman only short glances, but they were as piercing as her voice. Where did you learn that? Sumeko gave a start, but her hands did not stop. Forgive me, Aes Sedai, she said in a breathless, disjointed rush. I know I'm not supposed to. She'll die if I don't. I know I wasn't supposed to keep trying to. I just wanted to learn, Aes Sedai. Please. No, go on, Nynaeve said absently. Most of her attention was fixed on the woman under her hands, but not all. You seem to know a few things even I. That is to say, you have a very interesting way with the flows.
No problem, Sam Squash. You've been here enough times, and you've been to my brother's live and do our smoking lives that
Sumeko could not have
you're due for one.
But what she did here dropped her chin to her considerable chest. Her hands barely paused, though. Elaine, Annie went on, would you look for the ball, please? I suspect that door is the one. She nodded to the correct door, standing open like half a dozen others. That made Matt blink until he saw 2 tiny cloth-wrapped bundles lying in front of it where the looters must have dropped them. Here's, Elaine muttered. Yes, I can do that much at least. Half raising her hand toward Vannon, still on his knees, she let it fall with a sigh and strode through the doorway, which almost immediately emitted a cloud of dust and the sound of calling.
Yeah, I'm on my brother's live once in a while.
Iaina stalked out of the stairwell, forcing the terror on her dark friend in front of her by means of an arm twisted up into her back.
I have no idea when it comes to that.
Iaina's jaw was
I wore glasses since I was a kid, and once in a while I can afford to get contacts, but contacts for me are tend to be on the more expensive side.
The Black Sister was wide-eyed with terror, sagging so
in my opinion, I don't look good either way.
She must have been shielded, certainly, and with equal surety, she probably would have chosen being skinned to whatever was going to happen to her. Tears began leaking from her eyes, and her mouth sagged in silent sobs. Behind them came Veslin, the excited Milesian, and the sadder for the women, and then Harnan and 3 of the Red Arms, Fergan, Gordoran, and Metwin. 3 who had been at the front of the building. Harnan and 2
nice.
Had bloody gashes in their coats.
Oh shit's nearly empty.
They did not move as if
yeah, that's when it's definitely time to have something a new batch started.
Burn me if I know, Harnan replied.
Because in my tent right now I have
with knives in the dark.
a Bubba J, a feminized regular one or photo, and then I got another one in my tent that's autoflower that's called The Secret, which are both from Aqua Genetics that sponsored my brother.
He looked around the hallway. Brianna and Tamara were on their feet, straightening their dresses.
And they're both looking pretty good. The Bubba J is definitely stretching, and the auto's already flowering. It's a pretty good size.
Nynaeve stood, helping up Sabella, a scrawny yellow-haired woman, and Sameko was still working on Femella, with her pale honey hair and big brown eyes. But he was never going to admire Melora's bosom again. Brianna knelt to straighten her limbs and close her eyes, while Tamara performed the same service for Janira. 2 lions were dead, and 6 of his red arms. Killed by
yeah, it's always good
the power would not touch.
do feminize that way.
I found it! Elaine shouted excitedly.
There's no worry about at least you have less to worry about it turning out anything else. You know for sure what it's going to be instead of having to wait and then
in that case, Matt announced,
check.
Bloody well getting out of here now. Nobody argued. Oh, Nynaeve and Elaine insisted on all the men making sacks out of their jackets with things they rooted out of the room.
But now, well, nowadays, me and my brother
and Rihanna had to go down and recruit men to
can
down the boat landing.
Go towards the feminized seeds more than we used to, just because that's for sure feminized.
Chapter 39. Promises to keep. We are bloody well getting out of here now, Matt said again later.
Hell yeah.
There was argument. There had been argument for the past half hour, near enough. Outside,
because there's one time I did some seeds, there were just regular photos. I had 5 gold in my tent, and I ended up having to pretty much chop them all down one after the other because one showed signs of it being male, so I chopped that down, and yeah, they just went from one after the other. Where I had to cut down my essentially a whole harvest. I had to chop them all down.
Yet it was crowded even so.
Pretty much get 5 plants that I had going in my tent. All I ended up having to get chopped down.
Watching him with those dark
And that was
eyes and a small smile, idly kicking her
that was
blue and yellow
messed up day there, or messed up time, should I say?
He suspected Elaine and Nynaeve had spoken to her. They were there too, seated to either side of the queen, somehow in clean dresses and apparently even bathed, though they had only been out of his sight for minutes at a stretch since returning to the palace. They almost matched Thailand for regal dignity in their bright silks. He was not sure.
No shit.
Impressed with the lace and elaborate. They looked ready for a royal ball, not a journey. Himself was still in his muck with his dusty the silver fox head caught in his undone shirt. Knotting a leather cord had shortened it, but he wanted to touch his skin. After all. Truth, those 3 women could probably have crowded the room by themselves. Thailand could have done it by herself, so far as he was concerned. If Nynaeve or Elaine had spoken to her, it was a very good thing that he was going. They 3 could have done it alone, but... This is preposterous, Marililla announced. I've never heard of any shadow spawn called a golem. Have any of you? That was directed to Adelius and Vendine, Saritha and Karyana. Facing Thailand, the cool-eyed Aes Sedai serenity of all 5 made a fair job of turning their high-backed armchairs. He could not understand why Elaine just sat like lumps, coolly serene too, but absolutely silent. They knew, they understood, and for some reason, Marililla and that lot slathered their tongues with meekness for them now. Matt Cawthon, on the other hand, was a hairy-eared lout who needed to be kicked, and from Marililla, they were all ready to do the kicking. I saw the thing, he said, Elaine saw the thing. Rihanna and the wise woman saw it. Ask any of them. Gathered at the end of the room, Rihanna and the 5 surviving wise women shrank back like huddling hens, afraid of actual questions. All but Sameko, anyway. Thumbs tucked behind her long red belt, the round woman kept frowning at the Aes Sedai, then shaking her head, frowning, then shaking her head. Nynaeve had a considerable talk with her in the privacy of the cabin on the boat coming back, and Matt thought that had something to do with her newfound attitude. He had caught mention of Aes Sedai more than once. Not that he had been trying to eavesdrop. The rest seemed to be wondering whether they should offer to fetch tea. Only Sameko had even appeared to consider the offer of a chair. Sabella, flapping bony arms in shock, had nearly fainted. No one denies the word of Elaine Aes Sedai, Master Cawthon, said Renila Din Kaelan Bluestar in a cool, deep voice. Even had the dignified woman in silks to match the red and yellow floor tiles not been named to him earlier, the old memories meshed into his own would have identified her as Windfinder to the mistress of the ships by the 10 fat gold rings in her earlobes, those in each ear connected by a golden chain and half hidden by the narrow wings of white in her straight black hair. The medallions clustered along the finer chain that ran to her nose ring would tell him what clan she came from, among other things. So were the tattoos on her slim dark hands.
Hell yeah. Yeah, you definitely got to play every day on that to get the hang of it. Or to get better at it.
Nearly 20 Seafolk women stood gathered behind her chair, a riot of colorful silks and earrings and medallions on chains for the most part. The first odd thing he had noticed about them was their attitude toward the Aes Sedai. They were perfectly respectful, on the surface at any rate, but he had never before seen anyone look at Aes Sedai smugly. The second odd thing came from those other men's memories. He did not know a great deal about the Seafolk from them, but enough. Every Atha-an-Mier, man or woman, began as the lowest deckhand, whether they were destined one day to become the master of the blades, or the mistress of the ships herself. And every step of the way between, the Seafolk were sticklers for rank, to make any king or Aes Sedai look a sloven. The women behind Renata were a peculiar lot by any measure. Windfinders to wave mistresses rubbing shoulders with windfinders from swords, by their medallions. But 2 wore bright blouses of plain wool above the dark pearly breeches of deckhands, each with a single thin ring in her left ear. A second and third ring in the right indicated they were being trained as windfinders, but with 2 more to earn, not to mention the nose ring, It would be a long while yet that either would find herself called to haul sail whenever the deckmaster needed her, and find the deckmaster's flail across her rump if she did not move quickly enough. Those two did not belong in this gathering by any memory he had. Normally, the Windfinder to the mistress of ships would not even have spoken to one of them. Very much as I said, Renata, Marililla said, icily condescending. She had certainly noticed those smug glances. That tone did not change as she shifted her attention to him. Do not grow petulant, Master Coffin. We are willing to listen to reason, if you have any. Matt gathered patience. He hoped he could find enough. Maybe if he used both hands and both feet. Golem were created in the middle of the War of the Power, during the Age of Legends, he began from the beginning. Almost from the beginning of what Brigida had told him. He turned, facing each group of women as he spoke, burning if he was going to let one bunch think they were more important, or that he was bloody pleading with them, especially since he was. They were made to assassinate Aes Sedai. No other reason. To kill people who could channel. The one power won't help you. The power won't touch a golem. In fact, they can sense the ability to channel.
It's been
50 paces of you.
well, it's been pretty cold, at least for us, cold.
You won't know the golem until it's too late. They look just like anybody else.
Because right now it's
Inside,
it's
Golem
33 degrees outside right now, and it's 1:14 in the morning.
with one hand.
We're supposed to have like a high 58 today.
Stay in bed. Suppressing a shiver, he pressed on. The women, all of them, watched him, almost not appearing to blink. He would not let them see him shiver. There were only 6 Golem made, 3 male and 3 female. At least, that's what they look like. Apparently, even the Forsaken were a little uneasy about them. Or maybe they just decided 6 was enough. Either way, we know one is in Abu Dar, probably kept alive since the breaking, in a stasis box. We don't know if any others were put into that box, but one is more than enough. Whoever sent him, and it had to be one of the Forsaken, knew to follow us across the river. He had to have been sent after the Bowl of the Winds, and by what he said to me, to kill Nynaeve or Elaine, maybe both. He spared them a quick look, soothing and sympathetic. Nobody could feel easy knowing that thing was
Oh shit.
In return, he received a puzzled frown from Elaine, just the smallest wrinkling of her forehead.
That's crazy.
And from Nynaeve, a slight wave of the hand, an impatient wave, to get on with it. To continue, he said, shooting the pair of them a glare. It was very hard not to sigh.
So you're a little bit cooler than what we were
Whoever
at.
sent the Golem has to know the bowl is here in the Tarasin Palace.
Let's see.
If he or she sends the Golem here, some of you are going to die. Maybe a lot of you. I can't protect all of you at once. Maybe he'll get the bowl, too. And that's on top of Ferian Boda. Small chance she's alone, even with Ispan a prisoner. So that means we have the Black Odja to worry about as well. Just in case the Forsaken and the Golem aren't enough for you. Rihanna and the Wise Woman drew themselves up even more indignantly than Marililla and her friends.
Turn Celsius real quick.
And the Aes Sedai, stiffening and gathering skirts, looked ready to stalk out in a huff. Press on.
Yeah, because right now we're at 1 Celsius.
Now do you see why you all have to leave the palace?
And we're supposed to have a high today of 14 Celsius and a low of 2 Celsius.
Vernila's sniff would have startled geese in the next room. You merely repeat yourself, Master Cawthon. Marililla Sedai says she has never heard of this Golem. Elaine Sedai says there was a strange man, a creature, but little else. What is this stasis box? You have not explained that. How do you know what you claim to know? Why should we go any further from the water than we are, on the word of a man who creates fables from air? Matt looked to Nynaeve and Elaine, though with little hope. If they would only open their mouths, this could have been finished long since, but they gazed back at him, practicing expressionless Aes Sedai masks, till their jaws must be creaking. He could not understand their silence. Beerboom's account of events in the Rahad had been all they gave.
That would get True just trying to get used to that, just because how we've always been. It'd be like us switching to Celsius.
In another part of the palace, her presence known only to a handful. Nynaeve had forced some concoction down her throat, a foul-smelling mix of herbs that bulbs the woman's eyes going down. And had her
Yeah, we measure everything in feet too.
And the rest
Or
of the meeting circle occupied
I guess always have, at least as long as I know.
But very assiduous. And even made it extremely clear that should they let Ispan get away, they had best start running before she laid hands on them again. He very carefully did not look toward Perdita, standing beside the door with Alienda. The Aiel woman wore an Ebu Dari dress, not the plain wool she had returned in, but a silver-gray silk riding dress that jarred with her plain-sheathed, one-handled belt knife. Perdita had been quick to shed her own dress for her usual short coat and wide trousers, these dark blue and dark green. A quiver already hung at her hip. She was the source of everything he knew about Golem and stasis boxes, except what his eyes had seen in the Rahad, and he would not have revealed that on a hot grill. I read a book once that talked about, he began, and Renina cut him off. A book, she sneered. I will not abandon the salt for a book Aes Sedai do not know. Suddenly it struck Mac that he was the only man present. Lan had gone off at Nynaeve's command, gone as tamely as Veslin had at his mother's. Sal and Julian were packing to leave. They'd probably finished packing by now. If there was any use to it, if they ever did leave. The only man, surrounded by a wall of women who apparently intended to let him beat his head against that wall till his brains were scrambled. It made no sense. None. They looked at him, waiting.
Now,
Nynaeve, in yellow-slashed, lace-trimmed blue, had pulled her braid over her shoulder so it hung down between her breasts. But that heavy gold ring, Lan's ring, he had learned, was carefully positioned to show anyway. Her face was smooth, and her hands rested in her lap, yet sometimes her fingers twitched. Elaine, in green Ebu Dari silk that made Nynaeve seem covered up despite the smoky lace collar under her chin, gazed back at him with eyes like cool pools of deep blue water. Her hands lay too. Now and again, she would begin to trace the thread of golden.
I don't know.
Then immediately stop. Why did they say something? They're trying to get back.
I'll have to check.
Just in case Matt wants to be in charge so much, let him see how well he can do with Atlas. He might have believed it of Nynaeve any time but this anyway, but not of Elaine. Not anymore. So why? Brianna and the wise women did not huddle away from him as they did from the Aes Sedai, but their manner toward him
it's in courts or leaders.
Respectful nod. Honey-haired Femella went so far as a friendly smile. Strangely, Rihanna blushed, a pale stain. But they did not count as opposition, really. The six women had not said a dozen unprompted words between them since entering this room. Everyone would jump if Nynaeve were language.
Because everything's like inches, feet, miles.
Marilla's eyes flickered past him toward Nynaeve and Elaine for one instant. Saritha began to swing his skirts under his gaze, seemingly unaware of doing so. Some suspicion loomed in his mind. Skirts. Brigida's ready quiver. Monkey suspicion. He did not really know of what, just that he had been going about this the wrong way. He gave Nynaeve a stern look, and Elaine a sterner. Butter would not have Slowly, he walked toward the sea folk. He just walked, but he heard someone with Marillella sniff, and Saritha muttered, "Insolence." Well, you'll have to show them insolence. If Nynaeve and Elaine did not like it, they should have taken him into their confidence. Like, but he hated being used, especially when he did not know how or why. Stopping in front of Rhaenyra's chair, he studied the dark faces of the Afa women behind it before looking down to her. She frowned, stroking a knife set with thrust behind her sash. She was a handsome woman rather than pretty, somewhere in her middle years. And under different circumstances, he might have enjoyed looking at her eyes. They were large black pools a man could spend his time gazing into. Under different circumstances. Somehow the sea folk were the fly in the cream pitcher, and he had not a clue how to pluck it out. He managed to keep his irritation under control, barely. What the bloody do? You can all channel, I understand, he said quietly, but that doesn't mean much to me. As well be straight from the start. You can ask Adelius or Van Dien how much I care whether a woman can channel. Renala looked past him toward Tylen, but it was not to the Queen she spoke. "No, she said dryly. I believe there is no mention in your bargain of my having to listen to this young oakum picker. I don't bloody care about your bargains with anybody else, you daughter of the sands," Matt snapped. So his irritation was not that well under control. Imagine that so much. Gasps rose among the women behind him. Something over 1,000 years ago, a seafolk woman had called an Assaninian soldier a son of the sands just before trying to plant a blade in his ribs. The memory lay tucked inside Matt Cawthon's head now. It was not the worst insult among the Aka-Andria, but it came close. Renata's face gorged with blood. Hissing, eyes bulging in fury, she leaped to her feet, that moonstone-studded dagger flashing in her fist. Matt snatched it out of his hand before the blade could reach his chest, and pulled it back into her chair. He did have quick hands. He could still hold on to his temper, too. No matter how many women thought they could dance him for a puppet, he could... You listen to me, you bilgestone. I even Elaine needs you, or I'd leave you for the Golem to crack your bones and the Black Odger to pick over what's left. Well, as far as you're concerned, I'm the master of the blades, and my blades are bare. What that meant exactly, he had no idea, except for having once heard, when the blades are bare, even the mistress of the ships bows to the master of the blades. This is the bargain between you and me. You go where Nynaeve and Elaine want, and in return, I won't tie a lot of you across horses like pack saddles and haul you there. That was no way to go on. Not with the wingfinder to the mistress of the ships. Not with a bilge boy of a broken-backed darter, for that matter. Renata quivered with the effort of not going for him with her bare hands, and never mind her dagger in his hand. It is a great under the light, she growled. Her eyes nearly started out of her head. Her mouth worked, confusion and disbelief suddenly chasing one another across her face. This time, the gasps sounded as if the wind had ripped the curtains down. It is agreed, Matt said quickly, and touching fingers to his lips, he pressed them to hers. After a moment, she did the same, fingers trembling against his mouth. He held out the dagger, and she stared dully at it before taking it from him. The blade went back into its jeweled sheath. It was not polite to kill someone you had sealed a bargain with. At least, not until the terms were fulfilled. Murmurs began among the women behind her chair, rising, and Renila stirred herself to clap her hands once.
Oh, shit.
That silenced windfinders to wave mistresses as quickly as the two deckhands in training.
Hell yeah.
I think I was talking with a Tavira. That cool, deep voice.
I wish me and my brother had the room to do a good amount outside versus just
I think you will walk a rope for me.
2 plants.
He did not know what that meant.
Usually
Except that she made it sound
one I'm
pleasant.
doing and one he's doing.
His best leg. All things are possible if it pleases the light, he murmured. Courtesy paid, but her smile was disturbingly hopeful. When he turned
I
back
think
to the
we're
rest
allowed
of
to
the
do
room, he thought he had horns and wings for the
12
statement.
each.
Is there any further argument? He asked in a wry tone, and did not wait for answers. I thought not. In that case, I suggest you pick out some spot well away from here. We can be on our way as soon as you bundle up your belongings. They made a show of discussion. Elaine mentioned Camelin, sounding at least half serious, and Cariana suggested several remote villages in the Black Hills, all easily reached by gateway. Like anywhere was easily reached by gateway. Van Deen spoke of Arafel, and Avienda suggested Royan and the Aiel Waste, with the seafolk women growing glummer the farther from the sea were the places named. All a show. To Matt, at least,
Hell yeah.
was clear by Nynaeve's
That's
impatient
badass.
rate, despite the suggestions coming hot and fast. If I may speak,
That's definitely a good area there.
She even raised her hand. The kin maintain a farm on the other side, a few miles north. Everyone knows it is a retreat for women who need contemplation and quiet, but no one connects it to us. The buildings are large and quite comfortable, if there's any need to stay long. And yes, Lenny broke in. Yes, I think that sounds just the thing. What do you say, Elaine? I think it sounds wonderful, Nynaeve. I know Renata will appreciate staying close to the sea. The other 5 sisters practically piled on top of her, saying how agreeable it sounded, how superior to any other suggestion. Matt rolled his eyes to the heavens. Highland was a study in not seeing what lay under her nose, but Renata snapped at it like a trout taking a lace wing. Which was the point, of course. For some reason, she was not to know that Nynaeve and Elaine had had everything arranged beforehand. She led the rest of the seafolk women out to gather whatever belongings they had brought, before Nynaeve and Elaine could change their minds. Those 2 would have followed Marililla and the other Aes Sedai, but he crooked a finger at them. They exchanged glances. He would have had to talk an hour to say as much as passed in those looks. Then, somewhat to his surprise, came to him. Avienda and Brigida watched from the door.
Hell yeah.
From her chair.
That's the way to have it, bro.
I am very sorry to have used you, Elaine said before she got the word out. Her smile flashed that dimple at him. We did have reasons, Matt. You must believe that. Which you do not need to know, Nynaeve put in firmly, flipping her braid back over her shoulder with a practiced toss of her head that made the gold ring bounce on her bosom. Lan must be insane. I must say, I never wanted you to do what you did. Whatever in the world made you think of trying to bully them? You could have ruined everything. What's life if you don't take a chance now and then? He said blithely. As well by him if they thought it was planned instead of temper. But they had used him again without telling him, and he wanted a bit back for that. Next time you have to make a bargain with the sea folk, let me make it for you. Maybe that way it won't turn out as badly as the last one. Spots of color blooming in Nynaeve's cheeks told him he had hit the mark squarely. Not bad shooting, blindfolded. Elaine, though, just murmured, a most observant subject, in tones of rueful amusement. Being in her good books might turn out less comfortable than being in her bad. They swept toward the door without letting him say more. Well, nobody thought they would explain anything. Both were Aes Sedai to the bone. A man learned to live with what he had to. Tylan had all but slipped from his mind, but he had not from hers. She caught him up before he took 2 steps. Nynaeve and Elaine paused at the door with Avienda and Brigida watching. So they saw when Tylan
This book's almost done.
Some things nobody could learn to live with.
Almost is
Elaine put on
a
a face
couple more
of commiseration.
chapters, but that's
Nynaeve
still
with glowering disapproval.
2-3 hours of playtime.
While Brigida wore her grin openly. They all bloody knew. Nynaeve thinks you're a little boy needing protection. Tylan breathed up at him. I know you're a grown man. Her smoky chuckle made that the dirtiest comment he had ever heard. The 4 women by the door got to
Real
watch his
shit, that's
face turn
crazy.
red. I will miss you, Pigeon. What you did with Renata was magnificent. I do so admire masterful men. I'll miss you too, he muttered. To his shock, that was simple truth. He was leaving Abu Dar just in time. But if we meet again, I'll do the chasing. She chortled at him, and those dark eagle's eyes almost glowed. I admire masterful men, Duckling, but not when they try being masterful with me. Seizing his ears, she pulled his head down where she could kiss him. He never saw Nynaeve and the others go, and he walked out on unsteady legs, tucking his shirt back in. He had returned to fetch his spear from the corner and his hat. The woman had no shame, not a scrap of it.
Right. Definitely gotta
She
keep
found
them ones
Tom and
out.
Julian coming out of Tylen's apartments, followed by Nera and Wilkin. Elysian's a stout man, who each lugged a large wicker pannier made for a pack saddle. Loaded with his belongings, he realized. Julian carried
All right, everyone. I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. You gotta try to see if I can't get some sleep because I gotta get up. Well, I say early, but it's not really early. It's just early for me. But I gotta get up early for a dentist appointment, so gotta make sure I'm nice and I guess rested for that. See how that goes. But I'm definitely looking forward to it, but I'm not just because I don't like dentists. But hey, you have a good night too, brother. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.